Ladies, gentlemen of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, welcome to my Loki Season 2, Episode 4, titled Heart of the TVA Recap, Review, and Breakdown. And my goodness, did this episode feel like quite, I guess you would say, season finale, especially with what happened at the end there. There's quite a bit that happened throughout the episode, of course, that we're going to dive into, but just like the big events that happened in last week's episode and where we went over quite a bit of theory time, in this week's episode, especially towards the end, yeah, you could say there were quite a few things that happened, especially with Victor Timely. Did he really die? I don't think so, and I think we could have a good idea of what might actually be happening there when he got spaghettified. And what happened to our favorite characters, Loki, Sylvie, Mobius, frickin' OB, you name it, when that giant Loom wave washed over the TVA. There's a few theories out there as well, so I would love to know yours down in the comments below. Make sure you leave them, because there's a lot of things that could come out of this. And of course, go on to like this video if you do go on to enjoy it. And of course, subscribe for more Marvel content just like this. So right at the beginning, I did enjoy, once again, another play on the Marvel Studios intro screen, sending us right into this Doctor Who-y kind of wormhole to the end of time. And we pick up right from the ending events of last episode with Miss Minutes and Ravonna Renslayer. And I have to admit, I didn't think we'd see a flashback with He Who Remains and Renslayer right away, but Miss Minutes says there's something you have to see, and she plays that old recording. So this is where we see the old version of Ravonna Renslayer head back to the TVA. She says that it's awaiting their commands, and He Who Remains stays behind, and he instructs Miss Minutes to launch Protocol 42 to erase not only her memories, but everyone. So I honestly hope we get a bit more expansion on this flashback here. I don't know if this is going to be the only aspect of it we get, because I feel like there's a lot more we could see. And I'm not talking about seeing the old Ravonna Renslayer go about the multiversal war and lead the armies of He Who Remains. I'm not talking like that crazy CGI fest version of flashbacks, but just a bit more into the past. And I would like to think that we're going to get it. And one thing I want to mention as well is that I guess the slight hint of romance we got between Victor Timely and Ravonna last episode, that was very fleeting. It was like slightly there being teased, and then it was gone. I thought maybe we would have seen that more with He Who Remains and Ravonna flashbacks when she had her memories, but it didn't really seem that they were in a romantic partnership of any kind. So I don't know, maybe they are really glossing over that, and last episode between Ravonna and Victor was quite literally the only nod to that in the comics we're gonna get. But let me know if you have any theories there. I mean, I can't imagine that present day Ravonna is gonna be down for anything, because she doesn't really seem to like anyone. Now, the next scene after this, I like how it picked up with Victor walking through the time door, again picking up right after the events of last episode, and he's in the very council room of where there's the leftover pruned wall revealing the heads of Kang. So this Victor that we're seeing right now, I know there's been a lot of theories floating around since the end of last episode, like is there a little bit more to him? And we'll get to that in this breakdown, of course, because there is quite a bit to say there. But here, he seems to be quite bewildered because everyone seems to want him for something. And so this is where Mobius and Loki catch up with him and bring him to none other than OB. And I was kind of thinking, okay, well, what's going to happen here? And we had a little bit of fanboying out over each other, because in this moment, we learn from OB that he's learned everything he knows from a brilliant 19th century inventor known as Victor Timely, and that if Victor Timely had the resources back then, he would have been bigger than Einstein. And this is where OB realizes that he is Victor. And so, you know, this is where everyone's like, so if your work is based on his work and his work is based on your work, then it's kind of like a snake eating its own tail, which is a very literal nod to OB's name, Ouroboros, which is really got a larger meaning for an ancient symbol for a serpent eating its own tail, representing death and rebirth, kind of just like the cycle of life, all while being devoured by itself. It's also being reborn by itself, which can kind of be attributed to the events of Loki, especially with what's going on with the Kangs and He Who Remains, setting off the book in the past with Ravonna and Miss Minutes, and then, yet we've got this whole thing with OB. Now, I only had like a minor issue here, and I would love for you to interject down in the comments just in case I'm kind of forgetting anything, but in terms of like, I guess, somewhat of a believability aspect with the writing here. I was just thinking, okay, OB, how do you just drop that in conversation in front of Mobius, in front of Loki, that you learned everything you know from Victor Timely? So do you just mean via a different journal? Like, was a journal dropped off to OB? But I don't think it was, because after all, this handbook that was even dropped off to Victor Timely says that it was made by OB, like in every version of it that we've seen so far. So this seems to infer to me that OB learned everything he knew from Victor Timely, perhaps in person, made the handbook, and that's how the handbook thing happens. But that's a pretty big deal, because if they did ask OB that, he could maybe be like, oh yes, so this is how I met Victor Timely, I learned everything I knew from him. Yet again, how did he do that? Because he admits that he's from the 19th century. This is where I get it's meant to be a larger nod to the whole Ouroboros meaning of, again, the repeated cycle. I just feel like people or characters in this moment would ask a question about that, but they don't. Now, that's all I'm getting at. This is where they come up with a plan, and boy, does that plan go awry towards the end of the episode, and that is to take the throughput multiplier into the launcher, launch it towards the Loom, and docking with it then scales the Loom's capacity to manage this massive backlog of branches that is, at the moment, resulting in a potential meltdown, which kind of does happen. And I don't know about anyone else. Let me know down in the comments if at this moment, when the throughput multiplier was being talked about, and when Victor Timely presented his own throughput multiplier, that I was thinking, okay, there could be, even though he's acting all like bewildered and stuff like that, what if there is a more subtle plan here, a more grand scheming plan that he is up to? I mean, after all, he's a bit of a swindler, so I've just never really trusted him, but maybe that's my theory brain just trying to look for something more where there isn't necessarily something. Although there is a line that gets said that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes that I feel like definitely implied that there was something a little bit more to him. So since the geniuses are figuring things out, this is where we have Mobius suggest that Loki, Sylvie, and him go and get some pie, and this pisses off Sylvie. I know people don't always agree with me here, but I just feel like I get it. This is a part of her character. She's meant to be angry, frustrated. It comes from a big part of her background. But I just feel like all of this rage and stuff that she's kind of giving over, even in the dialogue that she gives, it's just like, okay, well, what's the alternative, Sylvie? What is the alternative? Okay, nothing? Okay. Well, all you can do is go and get pie, to be fair. But I'm not saying that she can't be human or a god, whatever you want to call her, in a sense of emotions. I think it's just rinse and repeat. Does get a bit repetitive after a while, especially when things are spelled out to her in daylight. But one thing I will say is I did like the line of when she said that timelines or branches are just lines on a monitor. It doesn't matter if a few disappear, because you never bothered to look if one of them is yours, which obviously is a little bit of a deeper nod at Mobius, of which we're most certainly going to visit where he came from. Like, that is something they've been foreshadowing so much. Maybe even next episode, especially with what happens at the end of this episode. Again, more theory stuff on that a little bit later. But the line of timelines are just a line on a monitor goes back to the criticism I said episodes ago. This is kind of why I like this line, but maybe not for the right reasons in the episode. I feel like the show doesn't do a good enough job at making the audience feel, and you may agree or disagree here, let me know, feel the kind of gravity of what losing another branch is like. You kind of have the characters react and maybe sniffle and cry like B15 and other people, but to me, as Sylvie said, timelines are just, or branches are just lines on the monitor. Doesn't matter if a few disappear. And it's like, I know that it's supposed to matter because technically this is a whole other universe with a whole other Earth, a whole other freaking solar system, galaxies upon galaxies, everything getting destroyed within a blink of an eye. So it's incomprehensible loss of life from multiple planets and star systems. But I don't feel it. It's just a line on the screen. I don't know what more they could have done. Maybe they could have cut to like maybe this kind of antimatter pruning animation wiping other universes occasionally, and then I would have seen it a little bit more. Again, I'm not asking for like a whole minute scene. Even if it was just 15 seconds, that would have been cool. But right now, yeah, they are just lines on a monitor. So it is a bit harder, in my opinion, for the audience to connect with that, feel empathy for that, even though we know what it means. I just don't feel it, other than through Sylvie's consistent rage. And even then, going back to my slight criticism before, Sylvie was voicing that she has no faith in the TVA or Victor or Casey to solve the situation, and she actually rather burn the place down and start again. And it's just like, again, Sylvie, I know you're annoyed, but like, if you let that temporal wave come, even though we're going to get into theories as to what that means, because it doesn't mean the end of everything, at this moment, everyone thinks that it does. So she's saying that she doesn't want her McDonald's timeline branch to go, or other branches, yet she's like, oh, I'd rather burn it all down and just start again and stop the very thing or people that are trying to actually save everything. I don't know. I know some of you do reply to me saying, well, that's how she's supposed to be. But then I say, well, okay, you know, then she's kind of stupid. If that's how a character's supposed to be, she cares so much about the branches, yet kind of wants to burn it all down and has to have another version of herself, Loki, point out saying, well, burning it down is easy, but trying to fix what's broken is hard. So you have the character voicing in previous episodes that she wants to fix it. She wants her McDonald's branch timeline to be safe and other branches, yet she's also saying she wants to burn. It's just like, make your mind up. Like, this character is just frustrating to me. At the end of this scene, though, I found it very interesting how we had the line with Loki saying how you can't just give people free will and walk away. And, you know, this is getting into the grander theory that a lot of people have had with how Loki could be the one to rule over the TVA, like somewhat He Who Remains did. But as he kind of says here, for better or for worse, it's up to us to protect the timeline. It's up to us to do better than He Who Remains. But as Sylvie says in this moment, what, interfere for good? I've heard that before. We're playing gods, and he says, well, we are gods. It's a little bit of a conundrum where, you know, are you really going to give free will if you are going to potentially still watch over a timeline, inferring that he might need to interrupt it at some point in time. So up next, this is where we had another plot going on this episode, with B-15 wondering what to do with General Dox because she's been in holding ever since they took her back after pruning all of those branches. We have Judge Gamble say to B-15 that, well, you basically convinced me that this new way of the TVA is the right way to go, so maybe you can do the same thing with General Dox. But cut to a bit later, this is where we have Renslayer arrive, and she is being, like, she's like gone Terminatrix ruthless mode here. So she says to everyone in the holding cell that B-15 is plotting to take over the TVA. If we work together, we can stop her and protect this place. And I've got a little bit of an issue with that, and please feel free to interject, because I kind of want to know, just in case I am missing things. Because she talks about protecting this place, but wants to quite literally prevent the temporal loom from being fixed, which the key thing is, at this point in time, they thought it could be like the end of everything, the end of the TVA, wipe everyone out, kill everyone. Yet she wants to ensure it. So how is that protecting this place? So again here, another character where it's like, oh, you want to save this place, or do you not want to save this place? And she clearly wants the branches and the timeline all intact and not to go into temporal loom meltdown, because she even says in this moment, anyone who wants to join me and follows me out of that door and helps restore stability to the TVA will have a life on the timeline if they want it. But anyway, enough of my critique there. This is where, because nobody's really, you know, answering her other than X5, Miss Minutes turns on that torture device, that cube that just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and you guys all saw what happened. I mean, we didn't see what happened because this isn't R-rated, but yeah, that was very messed up. I mean, did you see kind of how creepy it was? Like, I feel like they've done a really good job at showing how frickin' sadistic Miss Minutes is here, because it makes this frickin' AI like so creepy, because she was like loving it. As the cube was getting smaller, you heard the people dying, and after the torture device turned off and there was nothing but like silence, you heard the trickling of like blood. And like, as you can imagine, if you squash like 15 or however many people were in that holding cell, it would turn into like soup. Alright, so as we ramp towards the ending of the episode, this is where Renslayer and Miss Minutes are really causing a bunch of trouble for everyone because OB realizes that Miss Minutes is taking control of all the systems. I did find it funny when we had Victor Timely brought to Miss Minutes and Renslayer. He was like, thank God, you're all okay. But this is that line I was referring to earlier, because we have Renslayer ask him where the device is, and he says, ladies, I think you're gonna like what I have to say. And then it cuts, and then when we pick up a little bit later, we don't really know what he said. And it kind of felt like, I mean, maybe he was just biding time because he's a bit of, again, a swindler, and he's a bit scared and just wants to survive all of this. But I don't know, maybe I'm thinking too much into it, but I felt like there was something to that line, because it's like with relation to the device, and I was already suspicious of the device, and I admit I may be projecting my own suspicions onto this, but I thought, okay, so what is going to happen when that device goes into the temporal loom? At this point, I didn't know what was going to happen because he got spaghettified, and we're going to talk about that because that can mean big, big, big things. But yeah, let me know if you think there was anything more to that. Up next, this is where things started to get very familiar. We had Sylvie get trapped in the elevator because Miss Minutes was trying to slow them down. Loki was racing around the TVA, except the scenes that we saw were of the Loki a couple of episodes ago racing around with the timer. And this is where we see our Loki, and pretty much everyone's theories were correct here with how he was the one to prune himself. And then we had that phone ringing, and damn you, I'm losing my voice here, damn you, Marvel, because it's like they knew everybody would be theorizing about, okay, so who's ringing on the phone? What could this mean? Could this mean something big? And granted, I think we do, as a fandom, take things so far, but I mean, come on, theory time is fun, and again, they've got the music, the score, like all ramping up to picking up that phone. And it's just for OB to say, oh, what's taking you guys so long? So this is where OB suggests rebooting the system. And he says that the safety system will be lost. And this means that the dampeners that prevent people from using magic at the TVA will also be off. So this means that Sylvie and Loki can indeed use their magic. And, you know, technically, this also means, I think, that things like the Infinity Stones that are at the TVA won't have a dampener on those either, and they won't just be paperweights. So I was kind of thinking in this moment, and some people may think this is a nitpick, but technically it's within the logic of the show, that those Infinity Stones at the TVA could come in mighty handy. I mean, technically, Loki could grab a time stone and reverse what happens at the end of this episode, and I guess it would be a bit of a Groundhog Day. I have no idea if that will happen, by the way. I'm just saying, probably not, because bringing Infinity Stones into it with the dampener off, or while there's an argument that could technically be done, that they probably won't do that, because it might be OP. So now that Loki and Sylvie have magic, this is when they screw around with X5. He goes in there, prunes Renslayer, and this is where they get Victor. Now, more on Renslayer and what happens and what could happen, should I say, to her in just a minute. This is where they scan Victor for his temporal aura so they can lift the blast shields. It says, welcome, he who remains, because they've kind of got the same temporal aura, although I will toss in a theory in just a second. And this is where stuff gets crazy. So this is where OB says that it's worse than what he thought. Loki volunteers to go, but this is where Victor insists. And once again, from this moment, I was very suspicious. I'm not saying that, you know, he planned for what happened to happen all along, but I was still thinking at this point in time when watching the episode, okay, why does he want to go so bad? Maybe it is just as simple as he wants to be brave, but still. And so we have Victor go out there and he starts running and gets instantly spaghettified. I did not expect that, and I think maybe a lot of people will be saying the same thing. OB says that the temporal radiation was just too high, and this is the end of the episode. We have the temporal loom go into meltdown, and we have the wave coming at them like a literal tidal wave engulfing the TVA. So let's dive into what happened. We'll get onto the little temporal loom meltdown wave in a second, but is Victor Timely really dead? Some of you, I know you will say yes, and I could be wrong here, but I don't necessarily think so. So it could be that when he ran out, as we saw, he was spaghettified, except that considering he was spaghettified in front of the loom, he could be basically spaghettified into the loom with the many strands of spaghetti of Victor that we saw, or that you're seeing on screen right now, into all of the different branches out there. Now, a lot of people are saying this as well, like this could be the very reason as to how there's different versions of Kang scattered across time and branches and you name it, because they're all technically a part of Victor Timely in this moment. And if you think about it, this could be why time slipping was even introduced to us. You know, the spaghettifying aspect of that when it was happening to Loki was somewhat similar to this. It's just that with Victor, he could have been sprinkled out there into freaking everything. And it's like, again, a bit of an Ouroboros ancient symbol meaning of the death and the rebirth of Kang. It's just over everything and everywhere and all time. Now, the only thing with this theory for me, or well, I think that's super interesting, and maybe it could turn out to be true and they're going to give a reason that trumps what I'm about to say. But the only thing about it for me is that, you know, to my knowledge, unless you're a very certain being or something, you don't need to be spaghettified into a temporal loom and scattered all across the branches to exist in other universes or other branches. I mean, normally you have infinite versions of yourself in infinite frickin' realities and parallel universes. So all while I think this theory is really cool, like in this moment where it's spaghettified, he could have been scattered out there, and this is how Kang went into every sector of different times and blah, blah, blah. It's just like, wouldn't he already exist in every branch out there in some way or another without this even happening? So let me know what you think of that. So another theory that I really like is that Victor Timely in this moment, in the spaghettification that occurred, still didn't die. It's just that, again, going back to the time slipping here, he could have time slipped into the 31st century. Because think about it, we did have another on-the-nose line from Obi saying, oh, you know, he was a genius in the 19th century, and if only he wasn't limited by his time, he could have been like bigger than Einstein. Well, what if in this moment he time slips into the 31st century, he's no longer limited by technology, and he does become way bigger than any scientist in history ever? And that goes back to what He Who Remains said in the Loki Season 1 finale, and I misremembered the lines last week, thank you to those of you who corrected me on that, in where he said, a variant of mine from the 31st century. Well, technically, Victor Timely is a variant. He could have now time slipped and spaghettified into the 31st century, now has the knowledge and technology to bring to fruition everything in the TVA guidebook thing. And then, you know, the freaking Ouroboros symbol, life, death, rebirth, Kang, scattered across everywhere meaning thing happens. If you're still with me there, I may or may not be making sense, but I think maybe this could have happened. And don't forget, by the way, this is still technically all a part of He Who Remains' freaking plan. Like, he's the one who wanted the book from Renslayer and Miss Minutes to be dropped off in Victor Timely's 19th century house. So, like, all of this could have still technically have gone according to plan. He might have known that he would have time slipped from the temporal radiation in this moment into the future, and then boom, you have everything happen as per Ouroboros. As for what happens where everything goes white, the temporal tidal wave hits the TVA, I do like the idea of everyone going back to their somewhat timeline, or their branch, if you will, or like the very somewhat nexus point of what caused them to become variants in the first place. So naturally, if this is what happens, this could be, you know, where we actually do get somewhat of those origins that have been heavily foreshadowed about Owen Wilson's Mobius. Maybe we see him freaking jet skiing into the sunset. Maybe we go back into Sylvie's past. Maybe, and I'd love to see this, we see what OB's life originally was and how he learned from Victor Timely. Like, what the heck is going on with that? So I do expect maybe the next episode to be a bit more mystical, like that, kind of going back and not necessarily cutting away from the main plot. And I'm not going to call it filler, but maybe more of a bridge to the episode after that, because I don't know if we're going to see Victor Timely next episode, although I do think he's still very much so going to be in the show. I think we will see him again, if not next episode, the episode after that. As for Renslayer being pruned, I guess if we don't see her next episode because of the reasons I just said with Victor, I think we could see her in the episode after that, just like Victor, but at the end of time. I wonder if Eliath would still be around, because I know Sylvie and Loki enchanted Eliath and he kind of like went swoosh, but I don't know if that meant his death. But if Eliath is still around and she goes to the void and I don't know, somehow, I don't know how she would do it, but somehow manages to control Alioth, then she would have a major upper hand on something insanely powerful under her control. Anyway, though, guys, I am still very much so enjoying the ride of Loki. I very much so enjoyed this episode. It did kind of feel like a season 1 finale, I'm not gonna lie, so it's very interesting to think of what we can assume is that they think they have something that's going to top what we had this episode, which makes me excited. I'm not going to overhype myself. We're just going to have to wait and see. But, you know, aside some of the nitpicks and criticisms that I occasionally have, I just really still like the story of Loki. This is the MCU content that I really am here for. I just find it like a fascinating story. I like the ideas that they're tackling. I like the Kang ideas they're doing. I like the imagination and theories that it requires for us to kind of think about each episode. There's just a lot going on, and on the universal stakes front that is going to impact the future of the MCU, and I think that's what mainly makes people like me and you invested in this kind of content for the MCU still. Anyway, though, I've been rambling for long enough, so let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video, especially if you got this far. Consider subscribing for more Loki content just like this. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you people of the MCU in the next video. Goodbye.